True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Tried calling her several times throughout the day and always got through to the answering machine.
Hey, where are you? I'm just calling to see how you're doing, and I guess I'll just keep trying to get hold of you.
Come home, go inside, pick up the normal packages on the way in, and open the door, and I can see down the hallway into my master bedroom, and there's stuff on the floor, papers, and her purse is on the floor, and I can't really see everything that's in there, but I know that that's not right, and the bed's not made. On top of that, my daughter's not running out to me, "Daddy, Daddy." And by the time I get most of the way down the hallway, I can see there's a large blood spot.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Today's episode is sponsored by RX Bar. For 25% off your first order, visit rxbar.com/TCB and enter promo code TCB at checkout. Grand Junction, Colorado is a picturesque town on the western slope of the Rocky Mountains. The Blagg family, Jennifer, Mike, and little Abby, had moved there from South Carolina for Mike's new job as operations manager at a local manufacturing plant. They set up house on an upper-middle-class suburban street. Jennifer stayed home with Abby and volunteered at her school, while Mike worked at his high-paying white-collar career. To those who knew them or saw them in passing on the street, they were the ideal family. Jennifer was an active young mother with an apparently loving and strong marriage when she disappeared with her 6-year-old daughter Abby on April 13, 2001. She and Mike were enthusiastic born-again Christians who doted on their daughter Abby, a healthy, blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl who was always smiling and sang herself to sleep. It was only after Mike came home from work and called 911 to report his wife and child missing that the woven fabric of the Blagg's carefully constructed lives would unravel publicly. Underneath the mask of a loving and faithful man, Mike Blagg was a man with dark secrets. It didn't take long for investigators to focus on him and consider that both Jennifer and Abby were victims of a husband and father who was capable of murdering his own family. But was Mike's secret interest in internet porn used against him? Being a porn addict does not make a person a murderer. To find him guilty of murder, police needed forensic evidence, including a body. Their search was remarkable, bordering on heroic, as investigators and volunteers spent 16 days sorting through the foulness of a massive landfill in the June heat. Today, in A Husband's Malice, we tell the story of a young mom and an innocent child who became the victims of a man who was supposed to love and protect them, a husband and a father named Mike Blagg. Now, before we get into it, Dick has a beer review for us.
I do. I have a nice Colorado beer. This one is called Tweak, brewed by Avery Brewing Company in Boulder, Colorado. Now, I'll say right up front, this is a monster beer. It's got an alcohol by volume of 16%.
Well, that's basically unheard of,
So
isn't it?
That's up there.
I don't think I've ever heard of a beer with that much.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is you don't even notice the alcohol.
Impressive.
So, but I think besides you and I having it, we'll see who else we could share it with.
Yeah, you don't think we should just split it? What's it,
Well,
750 mLs?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a big boy. So it is an imperial stout. It's a dark brown beer with a moderately sized head that leaves a ton of lacing on the sides of the glass. Now, the aroma is all booze, some vanilla, some coffee, a little bit of oak. And the aroma leads into the taste, which is quite excellent. You've got bourbon, some coffee, a little tiny bit of chocolate, and vanilla. And it's a very smooth, easy drinking beer, one of my highest rated stouts. So let's take this guy down to the quiet end.
All right, let's open it up first.
Well, I was going to open it down there, but if you want to open it here and then take it down.
Well, that's our routine. We usually open it, then we go down.
Okay.
All right,
so
let's open it.
Let's open this beer up and take it down to the quiet end.
Okay. All right. Things are quiet at the quiet end today.
They sure are. Yeah, I guess missing a week drove people away. They missed us too much, and they just went somewhere else.
They gave up and found a new podcast at a new bar.
And a new quiet end.
A new quiet end, yeah.
Well, we're back in business. We took our week's vacation.
We did.
So
I feel refreshed. I feel ready to go. How about you?
well, I'm fired up. Let's do it.
I did miss it, though.
So before marrying Mike Blagg, Jennifer grew up in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is okay.
Yes, it is.
Her parents broke up when she was a young child, and Jennifer lived with her mother and her older brother David. Now, as the two of them grew up, they were very close. Oftentimes it was just the two of them, so David would agree to play dolls with Jennifer, and then in turn Jennifer would agree to play with his Matchbox cars. They were raised as Christians, and their mother instilled in them a belief in God and heaven. So Jennifer danced, she took piano lessons. She apparently was a happy social child who liked to hang out with her friends. Now, when she was 12, she was victimized by a male relative who molested her, and she struggled in her teens with weight issues and depression. But still, she was a popular kid in high school and a very good student. In church, she sang in the choir and was an active member of the youth group. Jennifer graduated from high school in 1985, which was the same year that Mike Blagg became a graduate of Georgia Tech. Jennifer attended Oklahoma State University for 2 years before she moved to San Diego with her mother. There, she transferred to National University to finish her degree in business administration, and that's when she met Mike.
Yeah, now Mike, he was also born into a religious family, but they were Catholics. His family moved a lot because his father was an Air Force colonel. John Blagg, his father, was a career military attorney with the Judge Advocate General's office, so that's a pretty impressive career for him.
It certainly is. I mean, he was up there. He was an
Yeah.
attorney who chose to remain in the service.
Right. Makes me wonder if Mike thought he was a little bit above Jennifer. That might have been part of their dynamic. Mike, his sister, and his two brothers lived on Air Force bases and in several places, including Georgia, Texas, and Hawaii, while they were growing up. In his teens, Mike attended high school in Georgia. Now, he was very smart and a straight-A student. He was a member of the Governor's Honor Program, and he received the Georgia Certificate of Merit when he was a senior. He graduated in 1981 and was accepted at Georgia Tech, where he enrolled to study nuclear engineering. Mike wasn't handed what he had in life, however. He delivered pizzas to support himself in college, and he also joined the Navy ROTC. In 1985, he had a bachelor's degree, and that's when he joined the Navy and began helicopter flight training. Mike was married to someone else for a year when he was 21. Now, his first wife, though, would have nothing bad to say about him. She said they were just headed in different directions. After that divorce, Mike ended up doing some heavy drinking and spent time with many different women. He was a bit of a partier.
Well, he's early 20s,
Yeah,
newly divorced.
right. Helicopter pilot.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was getting some action,
It's
I
like-
guess you'd say.
halfway to Top Gun or something like that, right?
That's true. And was this the Top Gun time in the 80s? Is that when that came out?
Yeah, I think so, didn't it?
Probably. So, yeah, so he was a big deal with the girls, probably.
Yeah.
But this lifestyle, he found, was really not manageable for the long term, and he decided he wanted to settle down. That's when he became a born-again Christian. He was stationed in San Diego in 1988 when he met Jennifer at a beach party. A friend of Mike's was dating Jennifer's best friend, so he got her phone number and he asked her out. The first date was dinner and a movie, and that was on July 4th. After the movie, they watched the fireworks from Mount Carmel. Jennifer continued living with her mother while they were dating. Now, at this time, Mike was still doing some partying and drinking with his friends, and Jennifer didn't approve of that at all. But he wanted to be with her, so he decided to cut back on the partying, and he tried to make her happy. Jennifer's taking classes at this time at the National University to get a degree in business administration, so she wasn't really in a rush to settle down or get married until she finished her education. There were 1 or 2 times, according to friends, when she threatened to break up with Mike if he didn't stop drinking and partying so much.
So they continued to date, but the relationship was interrupted with Mike's long absences when he was out on extended cruises with his helicopter squadron. He eventually was stationed in the Persian Gulf, where he did 2 tours of duty in Kuwait and Iraq. Now, when he was 28 and Jennifer was 24, they did get married. This was in 1991. They'd been dating for 3 years. Now, Jennifer remained very close to her mother, Marilyn, and her brother, David. In fact, she called her mom every day to check in with her. So their daughter, Abby, didn't arrive right away. Mike and Jennifer had been married for 4 years when Jennifer had Abby. Now, Marilyn, her mom, was in the delivery room as her support person because Mike was at sea on the USS Kitty Hawk. Jennifer had had a very difficult pregnancy, and she had gone through most of it on her own. An initial ultrasound indicated that Abby could have Down syndrome, so she underwent an amniocentesis to do chromosome testing, and it showed that she did not have Down syndrome.
Now, how would an ultrasound show that they might have Down syndrome? What do they look for?
Well, the major thing is looking at skin fold thickness in the neck. That's something that can be seen in Down syndrome. And if they'd done a more detailed ultrasound, I suppose you could find some cardiac problems that would lead you to suspect Down syndrome.
Well, I'm just wondering, because amniocentesis, isn't there a risk of abortion with that?
Yeah, small.
Oh, it used to be higher, maybe? Because I'm thinking it used to be a risky thing to do.
Yeah, it's pretty tiny.
Okay. So not a big deal nowadays?
No.
Okay.
Well, even in 1991 or 1995, 20-some years ago, it still wasn't that big a deal.
Okay.
So the other problem was that Jennifer wasn't gaining enough weight during the pregnancy, so she began to drink Ensure. Now, she kind of overshot a little bit because she ended up gaining about 70 pounds, which is not recommended.
No, I think this was upsetting for her.
It obviously was.
Yeah.
And then after the baby, Abby, was born, Jennifer had quite a struggle to lose the extra pounds. And to top it all off, she had a pretty severe case of postpartum depression.
Yeah, so it kind of seemed like Mike needed to come home and stop traveling. So that's when he took a civilian job after Abby was born. And he was hired by a military contractor, and he moved the family to Phoenix. During the next 2 years, he and Jennifer became more entrenched in the evangelical Christianity. In 1997, the company moved Mike to their South Carolina office near Greenville. By this time, Mike espoused a literalist interpretation of the Bible, and he seemed to view the world in black and white and good and evil. There were no gray areas.
No gray zones in his worldview.
No, which is kind of scary when you get to that. It's not a good way to live because life doesn't work that way.
Well, there's no such thing as black and white only, right? There's gray.
Exactly, but not in his vision of the world.
No.
He was actually quoted as saying, "There are angels out there, and there are fallen angels working for Satan." So he really is taking the Bible literally.
He certainly is.
Yeah. And I suppose some people do that, although I think that's kind of unusual. Don't most people see it as kind of
well, remember,
parables?
they're very born-again evangelical Christians. So I think if you look in that particular category of Christianity, they probably do interpret the Bible literally.
Okay. So Mike and Jennifer both became deeply religious, and that was part of everything and every moment of their lives from there on out.
Yeah, they apparently couldn't make any decisions without praying and consulting the Lord.
Yeah, it did seem to become a bit much. I mean, they became founders of a chapter of the Intercessory Prayer Ministry. Now, this is a network of volunteers around the world who would try to fill all 24 hours of each day with prayers for fellow believers who would submit forms with their specific prayer requests. So, I mean, that's kind of nice. There's really nothing wrong with that. Mike told people that Satan was trying to cause problems, though, to stop them. So, I don't know. Just something to think about. Now, one thing their neighbors noticed was that Mike and Jennifer gave up their his and hers BMWs and replaced them with Dodge Neons.
Yeah, the Blaggs told neighbors that the matching luxury cars made them uncomfortable because the lifestyle that was associated with driving Beamers interfered with their ability to witness as Christians.
Yeah.
And I guess I can see that.
I could see that, sure. I mean, it's going to the opposite end of Joyce Myers, which I'm totally behind. Right?
Okay.
Now, the Blaggs seemed happy and didn't give the impression of a couple with marital problems. They were very active in the Baptist church, and Mike helped to teach Sunday school. Jennifer also sang in the choir. Less than 3 years after they joined the church, Mike was made a deacon. So this was unusually quick, but the pastor believed that he'd made a really big impact on the church in a very short period of time. Mike taught a Sunday school class for teens for about a year, but eventually his ultra-conservative views on abortion, sexuality, things like that, which are really big for teenagers, caused some of the members to complain about him. And this became an embarrassment for Jennifer, like maybe he was going a little overboard.
Yeah, that's the view of what was going on at the time, that he went maybe a little too far.
Yes.
With his students.
Exactly.
So in the year 2000, Mike's career took the family to Grand Junction, Colorado. There they rented a house in a middle-class neighborhood and made a good impression on their neighbors, who were mostly older couples. Now, although things looked good on the outside, the Blaggs were under a lot of stress. Their house back in South Carolina wasn't selling, and they finally sold it at a loss, losing much of their savings. I think it was something like $8,000, which almost 20 years ago was a pretty significant amount of money.
Hey, that's still a fair amount of money.
In her calls to her friends back in South Carolina, Jennifer admitted that she didn't like Colorado that much, but she was happy to see Mike in a job he enjoyed.
In Grand Junction, they joined 2 churches, Monument Baptist Church and New Hope Fellowship Church. They recruited people they called prayer warriors and began to set up another chapter of the prayer ministry. Abby was enrolled in the Book Cliff Christian School, and Jennifer volunteered there as a teacher's aide. She decided to stay home to be with her daughter. Abby seemed like a really happy, well-adjusted child. She was smart and outgoing. She would go up and shake hands and introduce herself to adults. Abby loved to talk, and Jennifer's friends even joked that she talked until their ears ached. Now, one thing about Abby, though, is she had, of course, taken on a lot of these religious ideas, and she was very into Christianity as well, obviously.
Oh, sure. That's what she was being raised in.
Right. Now, Mike called Abby a miniature Jennifer, actually, because she had a similar bubbly and very talkative personality. She was also outdoorsy, liked to go hiking and swimming with her parents, and her favorite treat was cookies and cream ice cream. As a first-grade student, Abby was excited to participate, but she was also a child who was able to entertain herself pretty well with her books, her dolls, or toys. In the evenings, she would play quietly while her parents were preparing dinner, and Abby went to bed each evening at 7 p.m. after Mike and Jennifer read to her. So all this just seems like happy, perfect family stuff.
It does. So although things in the Blagg home appeared harmonious, after Jennifer and Abby went missing, issues came to light from Jennifer's diary, notes between the couple, and Mike's computer browsing history that led people to suspect that all was not well in the household.
So let's go over the day of the disappearances. Now, Mike worked that day, and he returned to their rented house on a cul-de-sac called Pine Terrace Court and called 911 at 4:20 p.m. He told the dispatcher that he had just gotten home from work and there was blood all over the bed in the master bedroom. His wife's purse was spilled all over the floor, and his wife and daughter weren't home. The back door was ajar. Jennifer's car was still in the garage, and 2 pillows were missing from the bed. The dispatcher asked Mike if Abby had gone to school that day. He hadn't heard from the school, so he said he wasn't sure. He went to check Abby's room then, and he found her bed unmade and her school clothing still lying out for that morning. There was no blood in Abby's room, however. By the 911 operator's instructions, he went outside and waited on the back porch for the police to arrive.
It was unusual to get a call like this at 4 in the afternoon, especially from a neighborhood where the Blaggs had been living. The Redlands area was a neighborhood which was in the top quarter of Grand Junction's residential areas. The man who had found the blood on his bed was a businessman with a missing wife and young child. So these are not your typical victims of a violent crime.
Not at all. The detectives and other police vehicles arrived at the house along with an ambulance, and Michael Blagg was sitting in an ambulance with an EMT at his side. Detectives had Mike taken to the sheriff's office for an interview. After a preliminary look at the scene, police officers went out knocking on doors for witnesses to see if anyone had seen anything. Coroners were brought in to look at the blood in the bedroom. This was a significant amount of blood near the head of the bed. with thick, clotting streaks running down the side and pooled on the floor. So this wasn't just like a nosebleed amount of blood.
No, this was a significant bleed.
Yeah, worrisome.
Yeah. It was enough that people suspected that it could have been enough to cause at least serious bodily injury or death to either an adult or a child.
Yeah, they had the forensics pathologist come in, and that's what they determined, that it was serious.
Right. Again, it wasn't just a nosebleed.
The blood was on Jennifer's side of the bed, but where's Jennifer? That's the big question. And it was possible that Jennifer, maybe she'd snapped, killed her daughter, and then took off. That was something police, not knowing her, had to consider.
That's one thing.
Yep. So there's no Abby. The minivan's still there. So if a stranger, like a meth addict, had robbed the home for drug money, that would explain why some of Jennifer's jewelry was missing. But a drug addict would have no reason to take Jennifer and Abby from the home. If someone came to abduct Abby and killed Jennifer, it wouldn't make any sense for the killer to take Jennifer's body with him either. So it's a puzzling situation here.
Very weird situation.
Yeah.
Then the other possibility was that Mike himself had committed the crime. So Mike was joined in the ambulance by his minister and best friend, Ray Shirley. Detective Steve King introduced himself to Mike and asked Mike to come downtown to help figure out what had happened.
Yes, it was 5:15 when Steve King began his interview with Mike. And Mike didn't request an attorney, which surprises me because that goes against Jill and Dick's rules of interrogation. 101.
Lawyer up.
Lawyer up. So he didn't request an attorney. The interview started out with questions, about his job, his marriage, and he went over his morning routine with the detective. He said he gets up at 5:30 a.m., and Jennifer and Abby sleep until about 6:30. The master bedroom was downstairs, and Abby's room was upstairs. Mike said he got dressed in the downstairs guest bathroom, as he always did, so he wouldn't disturb them. Abby slept with her door open, but Mike went up and closed the door so his electric razor and the lights wouldn't wake her up. He said she was asleep in her bed that morning before he left for work, and he left the house at 6 a.m. Mike said he called Jennifer each morning around 7 to make sure they were awake and getting ready for school. That morning, he got the answering machine. This was unusual, but not totally unheard of. Sometimes, if Jennifer was in the bathroom, she'd let the answering machine pick up the phone. Mike left a message saying good morning and wishing them a good day at school. What'd you think of the messages?
That he left through the day?
Yeah. What'd you think of his whole demeanor in the messages? I thought it was a little funny.
Well, there's a couple things about that. On the one hand, he seems like the type of person who would call multiple times if his wife wasn't picking up. He just seems like that type of controlling person.
Sure.
You could also look at it as, I'm sure the police were, that he's trying to establish an alibi.
Right.
That he called these different times.
Yeah.
But I could see a guy like Mike, as he's presented in the book and stuff that we've looked at, that doesn't seem out of character for him.
No.
To make multiple calls.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. But I also think his demeanor was a little too lovey-dovey for people who've been married, 10 years? Yeah, they've been married 10 years.
She was 6 years old, and they'd been married 4 years before.
Yeah.
About 10. They're about to celebrate their 10th anniversary.
That's right, just a few days from their 10th anniversary.
Yeah.
So, sure, you can be lovey-dovey, but would you every day be that lovey-dovey? Kind of reminded me of Scott Peterson's message he left for Lacey after he'd killed her.
Well,
kind of phony.
You're just too cynical for this.
Well, that's looking back on what we know now, but I thought they were a bit much, like they were kind of a little bit acted out for the benefit of the police, knowing the police would listen to them.
That's a possibility.
Yeah.
So Mike called back 5 minutes after his first call. His company was in the process of open enrollment for health care, and he'd forgotten to ask Jennifer if she wanted to continue with the same plan. So he left a message that if he didn't hear from her, he would sign up for the same plan. And then he called around 10, because that's when Jennifer was usually back from volunteering at Abby's school. Now, in this message, he asked Jennifer to call him back when she had a chance. Then he called a fourth time around lunch. At this point, he said he was getting a little concerned. He called her cell phone, but didn't leave a message because Jennifer didn't like him to leave messages on her cell.
Right. If you're going to call the cell phone and I don't answer, send me a text. I agree.
Right.
Who checks voicemail anymore? Although this was the 90s.
Not you. Now, normally, Mike said he and Jennifer would speak 2 or 3 times a day on the phone. Now, we're already up to 4 calls at noon. He called her cell phone again, and this time he did leave a message saying, "Please call me when you get a chance." Then things got busy at work after Mike's lunch hour, and he didn't call again until after 3. He said at this point he's getting kind of worried. They never went all day without speaking. In the message he left this time, he told her he would be coming home at his normal time.
But if you listen to his actual message, he really doesn't sound worried. He's like, well, I don't know where you are, but I hope you're having a great day.
Yeah.
He doesn't sound that worried.
He's still pretty nonchalant.
Because he probably knows where they are, right?
Well, you're judging him already, huh?
Well, that's the sad truth of it.
So Detective King asked Mike to tell him about Jennifer. And Mike said she's the most energetic, enthusiastic, wonderful woman you could ever want to meet. She's a good Christian, warm, loving woman. 5'4", semi-blonde hair, which she's letting grow out. Brown eyes, just as cute as can be.
That's a bit much to me, too.
Yeah, and this was a direct quote.
Right. So Mike explained how Jennifer was involved in 2 churches and in building prayer teams. The 2 of them had started a prayer team that included about 14 people. Mike went on about their church activities, and the detective steered the conversation back to the house. Mike told the detective about their move to Grand Junction for this job. He described their marriage as very strong. He actually said they had a wonderful marriage. When the detective asked about Jennifer's health, Mike said she'd been healthier than ever since they lived in Colorado. She was on Allegra for allergies and Synthroid for hypothyroidism. Jennifer also had mitral valve prolapse. Anything significant about that, Dick?
Usually no. It means the mitral valve in the heart doesn't work as well as it should, and you get some regurgitation of blood. So it could eventually become some problem for the heart, but usually it's just a thing that's picked up on a routine exam, and you hear a murmur and do the testing and find it. So
okay. And she's a young woman.
Yeah.
She did have a hysterectomy very young, and she was on estrogen. And she'd also suffered from depression, but I guess she didn't want to take medication for it. She did try some medications, but I'm not sure if at the time she wasn't on anything. I wasn't able to really figure out the specifics on her medication situation, were you?
Yeah, no, I don't think she was taking any medication for depression.
Okay. Because I remember in one of her diary entries she said something about being on Lexapro and having a really bad reaction.
Right.
Which I've heard some people do have that. But that's all I really heard about that. Mike said they had no plans to have more children before her hysterectomy, so that wasn't a big deal for them. They had prayed about it, he said, and he had a vasectomy 6 months after Abby was born. After calling the school, detectives learned that Abby had not been in school. Now, this wasn't surprising because her clothes had still been laid out in her bedroom, so they already thought that she hadn't. The school hadn't called to check, though, and I guess it was determined that that was because Jennifer had a cold the day before, and the teachers there had just assumed that that's why Jennifer and Abby weren't there the next day. There were some rumors that someone had called the school, but those turned out to be false. Mike's behavior during this interview would raise a lot of eyebrows. He seemed quite unemotional and detached. When asked how he was feeling, he answered depressed, sad, scared. I mean, he pretty much said the right things, but the way he said them was a little bit strange.
Well, and here you go getting back into how you're supposed to act.
I know.
In the event of a tragedy like this.
I know. And it's something that really shouldn't matter.
Right.
But, as human beings, I think it's hard to ignore.
It is.
Yeah.
But still, there's no accepted way.
No, and his seeming unemotional certainly would not mean that he's guilty of anything.
No.
But I think detectives might have thought so. Detectives asked him what he thought had happened, and Mike said that he'd really been running some scenarios in his head of what might have happened, but he had no idea what had happened. There was nobody he could think of who would want to hurt them. But, he said, there was a lot of blood there.
There was an awful lot of blood there.
So he was worried that something bad had happened to his wife and daughter, which makes sense, of course. The police found it strange that there was a large amount of blood on the bed, though, and running off the sides, but there was no blood trail in the house, nothing on the carpet or walls that would show someone moving the body. Mike was asked if Jennifer would have left him on her own if that was a possibility, because she did have the resources, the money to do it.
Yeah, if she wanted to.
Yeah.
But it just didn't seem like a real possibility.
No, and her mother hadn't heard from her. She was very close to her mother. Then Mike did admit that they'd had an argument a couple of weeks before, and that was about job recruiters calling him and the possibility that they might have to move again, which seemed to be an issue between the two of them.
Yeah, and they spent some time in the book discussing this. Apparently Mike would be willing to talk to anybody who called about relocating. So I don't know if that's because he's going to get offered more money.
I think so.
But he wasn't shy about talking to recruiters.
No, but there's this whole thing about her thinking that God has them there for a reason, which I'm not sure what that was all about.
Right.
Right. So maybe that was her idea of wanting to stay put. But I think this is a good spot to take a moment to tell our listeners about our sponsor, RX Bars.
Let's do that.
An RX bar is a really great way to get your energy and nutrition because it's a whole protein bar made with 100% whole ingredients. So these bars go beyond a go-to tasty snack with great nutrition because they're actually very delicious. You see, it turns out that a bar made from wholesome, nutritious ingredients just naturally tastes good. Who'd have thought?
What an amazing thing.
I know. So artificial ingredients, chemicals, and sugar are absolutely not needed, and they aren't in RX bars.
And now my personal favorite is the peanut butter chocolate one.
I know. Peanut butter is always your favorite. And who can argue with the irresistible combination of chocolate and peanut butter? That's just a good combination. Now me, I'm more of a fruity snack fan like blueberry. It's very excellent to me.
Yeah, these RX bars are great for breakfast on the run, or a post-workout snack, or even to take on an airplane flight.
Yes, and I love to take things on a flight, don't I? Whenever we travel, which we recently did, my purse is chock-a-block full of snacks.
Yes, we can live for a couple weeks out of your purse contents.
That's right, because I always believe in being prepared. Now, RX bars, they're just a great source of nutrition, and these are great to keep handy. They fit right in your pocketbook. The creators of RX bars actually started out in 2013. They said they couldn't find a protein bar that wasn't full of artificial ingredients or fillers, so they developed these bars that are very simple and good for you. Now, these bars are dairy-free, soy-free, and gluten-free. There are 11 different flavor varieties, and not a one of them has added sugar. The ingredients are simple and pure, and the taste is amazing. So RX bars may be something you want to add to your life. And now RX Bars is offering True Crime Brewery listeners a great deal to try them out. For 25% off your first order, visit rxbar.com/TCB and enter promo code TCB at checkout. That's promo code TCB at rxbar.com for 25% off. Pretty good deal.
Great deal. So it's interesting that Mike and Jennifer talked about their life and their life decisions as if God was specifically planning things for them. And that's how they viewed things.
Yes, that's the one thing that really struck me.
Mike said that he and Jennifer believed God had put them in Colorado for a reason. Jennifer, as we've said, seemed to always look to God to make decisions for her in life in seemingly magical ways. Now, one example was that she would read the sayings on refrigerator magnets in stores and interpret them as personal messages from God to her.
Now, is it too much to say she was delusional?
I don't think so.
I mean, this is
But still, she's a devout Christian. I think she's going to be able to find messages from God to her in a multiple variety of ways.
Yeah, but she's kind of turned God into like a fairy godmother. And in some of her diary entries, she even called him Dad.
Yeah.
So he was like the male father figure she'd been lacking or something?
Could be.
There's definitely an unusual dynamic to her religious beliefs. Don't you think?
I think so.
Yeah. The only life insurance on Abby and Jennifer were $10,000 and $15,000 policies Mike had from work. So that doesn't seem like any kind of motive for him to hurt them. They had no credit card debt. They were renting the house they lived in and saving for a deposit on a new home. Like we said, the house in South Carolina had taken a long time to sell, and they'd lost about $8,000, so that was a setback. Still, Mike was making over $100,000 a year, and he seemed like a guy who was moving up in his career. So you really couldn't say that this couple had a lot of financial stress going on.
No, they had pretty much zero financial stress.
Well, maybe not zero, but yeah, I think
Pretty much.
It was low.
I mean, good income, no debt.
Yes.
So.
But trying to save for a house.
Yeah.
Yeah. During the course of his initial interview, the detectives had Mike stand up, turn around, so they could look for blood or anything on his clothing. And there was none. They even used luminol. Nothing turned up. Also, there was nothing that would be considered a defensive wound on his body.
So it doesn't look like there's a struggle.
No, not that he was involved in.
Right. But Detective King continued to be disturbed by Mike's calm demeanor. Now, during the conversation that he had with Mike, he learned that Mike had had prisoner of war training in the military, so he knew how to remain calm under stress. Mike took a lie detector test, which was either inconclusive or he passed. He didn't fail it.
Right, he didn't fail it. Which, I guess that kind of training could make it possible for you to do that. If you're learning how to deal in life or death situations and how to stand up in interrogation, maybe even torture type situations.
Yeah, well, that's what police thought.
Yeah. The church pastor, Pastor Blankenship, took Mike home to stay with him and his wife. Many church members stood beside Mike and supported his innocence. The only thing he said to Art Blankenship on the way to his house, though, was, "Art, have you ever been involved in anything like this in your entire life?" Now, this was an odd thing to say. It just made Art think, And he just answered, "Well, no."
Not me. I haven't had anything like this.
Yeah.
Not too many people have.
So I don't know. We could sit and debate what he meant by that, and we don't know, but it's a little bit of an odd statement.
Yeah, but nothing real incriminatory.
Well, I guess, but I mean, wouldn't you be saying more things like, we've got to find Jennifer and Abby? Holy shit, my family's gone? More stuff like that?
Yeah, I would.
I would expect.
He might just be saying, he's just been questioned for hours and hours and taken a lie detector test, and it wouldn't seem unusual to me to say to your pastor, "You ever been involved in anything like this?"
Okay. The way you presented that, I can understand it. Yeah. Okay.
So back at the crime scene, police are trying to make sense of the whole thing. Didn't look like an attack or a robbery. There was a large amount of blood, granted, but no signs of a struggle. Jennifer's purse was on top of the dresser, with the contents spilled over, including the keys to her minivan. There was also a printed email note from Michael in her purse as well. This note seemed to be an apology. He said he wanted to talk with her about the problems they had been having. Now, there's no record of the problems at this point.
No.
So this is something new to the police. So in the note was the line, "Don't give the devil a foothold."
They made a big deal out of that, but I don't really think that's a big deal.
No, I don't either.
This is how these people talk.
And then her jewelry box was tipped over by the bed, and it was empty. The police opinion was that this scene looked staged. Many things that a robber would have taken were left behind, and the house actually was surprisingly tidy and untouched. And the whole thing is, if you're in there with the intent of robbing, you're ransacking the place.
I guess, but I mean, that's making a lot of assumptions about the robber. If I was a robber, I wouldn't needlessly mess up the house. I'd take what I wanted to take and leave.
But how do you know what you want to take? You got to look through things.
Well, you go to the jewelry box. You go to certain areas.
Yeah.
Even if I'm looking through a drawer, I would do it neatly and put the drawer back in. I mean, I'm not an animal,
No,
even if I was a robber.
You would not. If you were a robber, you have a finite amount of time that you want to be in that house, and you want to get out of there. So you're opening drawers, you're tossing things all over the place.
Well, I mean, there are people in the house, so most robbers would have just left as soon as they knew anyone was home, right? Most robbers don't attack and kill people.
Right.
Or most burglars, I should say.
So we're not thinking that happened. But my point is that if you're robbing the place, you're trying to get in and out quickly so you don't get caught. and you just make a huge mess.
Well, that's what police say, so I guess they know.
You're a very neat burglar.
Well, I'm not a burglar. I'm just saying if I was, I wouldn't see the point in throwing things around.
Well, you're just using up valuable time. You might end up leaving something significant behind.
I would be a shitty burglar.
Yep.
Over the next few days, the Grand Junction community was worried that there was a killer on the loose in their town. In the beginning, they supported Mike overall, as he denied having anything to do with his family's disappearance, and he made a plea on TV for their return. Jennifer's mom was at Mike's side as he appealed to the community for help, but the forensics were still very disturbing. This large amount of blood on the bed was confirmed as Jennifer's, but there was no blood anywhere else in the house. The family van was taken in, and several small amounts of Jennifer's blood were found in that. Spots of her blood were on the door and inside, on the steering wheel, seats, and on the carpet. In follow-up interviews, Detective King told Mike that he was describing this picture-perfect relationship he had with Jennifer, and then at that point Mike began to reveal some of their problems. It was late November, so a couple weeks after, he admitted that he was addicted to hardcore pornography, which is kind of unusual for a born-again Christian, I guess.
I guess it sounds like they're incongruous with each other, but
right.
I mean, lots of people are addicted to hardcore porn.
I guess so.
Of all walks of life. So
that's true.
If the fact that he was a born-again Christian isn't that surprising.
Well, he said that when Jennifer found out about it, she was really upset. He said that they talked and argued about it, and here's the weird part. He said that eventually Jennifer decided to join him in watching the hardcore porn. And the detective was not believing that. Not believing that at all.
Well, I find that a little tough to believe. I don't know too many couples that watch hardcore pornography together.
Well, especially not someone like Jennifer. Mike said they had used the hardcore porn sites as an educational tool. He said that it started just after her hysterectomy. They couldn't have intercourse for a period of time, but they wanted to please each other. He talked about how God said it was wrong to withhold your body from your spouse, so they would watch the porn to learn about oral sex.
Yeah, now this is just mystifying to me, and apparently it didn't make much sense to Detective King. Yeah, he'd been with many women when he was in the military. He'd been married before. He must have known what oral sex involved.
Yeah, it's not that complicated.
It really is pretty simple, isn't it?
I think so.
Unless there's some mysterious technique you're supposed to pick up by viewing porn films.
Not that I'm aware of.
Me either.
In February, so 3 months later, Mike was brought back in for questioning, and again he didn't get a lawyer. And this was a serious interrogation this time. They had him in there for over 10 hours, and the FBI was involved. This is when Mike was directly accused of being responsible. They asked him what he had done with them, and they worked on getting a confession. They were trying to get that come-to-Jesus moment. In the interview, an FBI investigator said that it had been 3 months and the time had come for Mike to tell the truth finally. And at this point, Mike asked to pray, and he paused for a moment before looking up and asking if he could have the opportunity to talk with a lawyer first. He said, "I'm asking because I don't want to mess anything up here."
About time, Mike. And then he became tearful, prayed some more. He says, "I want to tell the truth, but I want a lawyer to tell me what the truth is going to mean."
So that's
interesting thing.
That sounds like he's on the verge of a confession, right?
Yeah, well, and the interrogators thought they'd been pretty close to getting confession. But then his request for a lawyer squashed that chance.
Yeah, so now they have no choice but to stop questioning him and let him go home, because he's not under arrest.
He's not. So meanwhile, in other details, Mike's accused of stealing a desk, a paper shredder, and some other office supplies from his employer. He claimed that he had bought some of the items from a company yard sale, and that he had been allowed to take some other things so that he could set up a home office for company-related work. But other employees said that the items had been stolen, and some had actually seen him taking things. So this gets him suspended from his job as these thefts are investigated. So now he's pretty much accused of murder. He's jobless. Things aren't looking good.
No. His answering machine had messages when he got back from that were left by his mother-in-law. who was no longer supporting him. The sheriff's office had shared information with her, she said, and she wanted to talk to him about it, so nothing good. She wanted Mike to give her any information he could possibly give her about where Jennifer and Abby were, but he didn't respond to her messages at all. Detectives came back to the townhouse the next morning that he'd rented, that's where he was living, and they had an updated search warrant. His car was parked out front, but he didn't answer the door. They called his cell phone, still no answer, and then they decided to go inside. The search warrant gave them the legal right to go in. The manager of the building went and got the master key, and they found Mike slumped in his bathtub with his wrists slashed. He was naked, surrounded by bright red water. There was an open Bible and a photo of Jennifer and Abby propped up on the edge of the bathtub. Now this was a serious attempt. He was barely conscious when the ambulance was called, and he was rushed to the hospital. He had deep vertical slashes on both of his forearms. The detectives tried to ask him where Jennifer and Abby were, but he maintained that he didn't know. He'd left a handwritten note near the tub, but it wasn't a confession at all.
No, the note read that he had always tried to do the right thing in life. He had made mistakes, and he was sorry for those. But he said he wasn't perfect, and he was not a murderer. So, directly from Mike, I didn't do it.
So he was admitted to the hospital in critical condition, and his doctors placed him on a psychiatric hold and kept him for 72 hours. When the news got out about Mike's thefts and his suicide attempt, the public opinion turned against him. The sheriff's spokesman announced that they would be prosecuting him for the thefts, and they continued to investigate him for the disappearance of Jennifer and Abby. But the police didn't have a murder case without more forensics, a confession, or a body. Now there was a big blue dumpster at Mike's workplace. This wasn't a typical square bin like you'd see outside an apartment building, but it was a larger industrial unit. It had a built-in compactor that would turn like a screw to push the trash tightly into one side of the container. Whoever used the dumpster had to stand on a metal walkway and drop the trash down into the open area. Then a switch on the control panel, which could only be operated with a key from inside the building, would run the compactor through a cycle where the trash would disappear from view. Police started to think if Mike had used this dumpster to dispose of the bodies of Jennifer and Abby, he could have done that. He would have had to load them in and then activate it, but once he did that, the bodies would be out of sight.
Right, and this was something that he was capable of doing.
Right. The fact that Mike had stolen from the company using the company truck made it seem more likely to them that he was comfortable committing crimes on the property. Also, his training made it likely that he would be very comfortable using this kind of machinery. The idea that Mike had gotten rid of the bodies in the dumpster was only a theory, but investigators were starting to believe it was a good one. If it was correct, the evidence they needed, though, would be in this huge Mesa County landfill, underneath 3 months' worth of trash. So before deciding to search this landfill, investigators needed to do an extensive search of the area in a 45-mile radius of the Blagg house.
Yeah, now I can see that before you're going to be investing all these man-hours into searching the landfill. But don't you think that this extensive search in the area around the house should have been done way earlier?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Because they figured out this 45-mile radius by checking when she filled the van with gas and determining the mileage, stuff like that. So they should have known that in the end of November.
Yeah.
So I don't know why they did that. I guess they were counting on the confession, maybe?
Well, or that they had done a search, just not a real thorough, extensive search, and hadn't come up with anything. I'm pretty sure, though, that before they wanted to go digging around in the landfill, they wanted to make sure her body or the two bodies weren't more easily found.
Absolutely. Jennifer's mom, Marilyn, and Jennifer's brother, David, showed up before dawn each day of this search. They made a collage of pictures of Jennifer and Abby and posted it where everyone would see it when they signed up to participate each day. Mike was told by police not to participate, and he told the Denver Post that he would have been glad to help, but they wouldn't let him. The search didn't find them, but it allowed the police to move forward with this landfill search, which was really a long shot.
It does sound like a long shot, doesn't it?
Yeah. It
But
was.
I guess they're running out of other ideas. They haven't found any bodies, so that's the next thing to do.
I mean, the bodies have to be somewhere. He didn't have that much time.
No, if it was him. So meanwhile, Mike flew to Atlanta while they were doing this extensive search, and he moved in with his mother in the town of Warner Robins, Georgia. Now, this landfill search was just a horrendous job.
Can't even imagine.
Oh, the landfill accepted sludge from wastewater treatment plants. There were hundreds of elk carcasses that were randomly dumped from roadkills and hunting.
Ugh.
Now, in order to protect the chain of custody of any evidence found, the only people who would be allowed to search would be law enforcement.
Yeah, so
Wouldn't
no
you-
volunteers
Wouldn't
allowed.
you be happy to get the straw that got you into that search?
It's terrible, but these guys and women, they seemed very committed to it. They wanted to do this for Jennifer's.
They were. They had
and Abby.
what was the name they had for themselves?
Oh, I don't know.
I forget, but they had a name.
They had a name.
Yeah,
I mean, they really put up with a lot of yuckiness
they sure
to
did.
get this done.
So the one thing they had going for them was that every trash truck that dumped had to be weighed and identified and directed to a specific area.
Oh, otherwise it would have been totally impossible.
They
Right?
couldn't have done it. So they had the area narrowed down to under a mile.
Still, if you think about a mile, looking for a body in a mile, that's still more than a needle in a
and
haystack.
they ended up with 2 areas that were the most likely. And then the other thing complicating it was that after the trash was dumped, it was rolled over by a 40-ton compactor over and over again. So if the bodies were found, they could be in pretty disturbing shape.
There's no way they wouldn't be. The temperatures were as high as 104 degrees, and the winds were blowing between 25 and 45 miles an hour. So the smell was just sickening. I mean, it was the kind of smell where people wanted to vomit. After 16 days of searching, investigator Henry Stoffel spotted an adult human leg dangling from a metal bucket of an excavator.
Here, what a sight that must have been.
Wow, what a shock, huh? I mean, even though that's what you're looking for, once you find it, it has to be shocking.
So this leg was protruding from a lumpy red cloth that looked like a tarp or a nylon bag. It rocked back and forth with a withered foot at the end of it.
So even if that's what you're looking for, it's got to be a shock to see a human leg.
I can't imagine.
No,
Blech.
awful. It's protruding from this lumpy red cloth-like tarp or nylon bag, and it rocked back and forth with the foot kind of dangling off of it, which they were afraid would actually fall off. The area was secured overnight until the FBI and CBI recovery team could arrive from Denver. So dry ice was brought to the scene and packed around the large metal bucket and the leg. But there was no way to prevent it. The leg fell out of the bucket, and there was not much holding it together.
No, I mean, the leg had been disarticulated from the rest of the body.
Yes.
So
this is horrible. I mean, this is a person. This is horrible to just even think about.
So the next day, once the investigators got there, they discovered that the red cloth was actually a tent, which turned out to be ideal for removing a body from the house and leaving no trace of blood because it's waterproof material. So as the investigators unwrapped the tent, they saw the rest of Jennifer's body, or at least what remained of the rest of her body.
Ugh.
Torso and limbs had been flattened and bent.
Oh, my God.
There was no way to tell by the appearance if it was Jennifer or even if it was a female body, but it was identified later as Jennifer Blagg. She was wearing her custom-made lower retainer in her mouth. Several bullet fragments were removed from her brain, and Stippling told the investigators that the gun had just been inches from her skin when she was shot. Then there was a tiny strand of blue thread in the path of the bullet, which indicated that the bullet had been shot through a pillow to muffle the sound. So the cause of death was gunshot wound to the head, and the manner of death was ruled a homicide.
So Jennifer had been shot in her bed, in her nightshirt, with her retainer in. After calling Jennifer's family, the police held a press conference to announce what they'd found out. Mike was arrested in Georgia that night. They didn't waste any time. He'd been doing construction work at a Methodist church. The church members were really shocked by his arrest. They said he'd been a big help, and he was very well liked during his short time there. Because of his previous suicide attempt, he was placed on suicide watch in Georgia, and he was held on a $1 million bond. He was extradited back to Colorado. Investigators continued the landfill search, looking for Abby, but Abby was never found. In late June, there was a church memorial service for Jennifer in Grand Junction. Abby's classmates from her first grade class sang songs and showed slides on a large screen of Jennifer and Abby, their time together as mother and daughter. Mike was in jail, but his mother and sister did attend this memorial service. Startling information from the investigative files made the news, and it really painted a picture of Mike Blagg as a man who'd been leading a double life. It was alleged that Mike was leaving work during lunch and getting topless massages. It was also reported that Jennifer had showed up with Abby at an agency for battered women asking for help, but it would turn out that neither of these allegations were true. In September 2002, the specific charges against Mike Blagg were finalized. He would be charged with first-degree murder, the abuse of a corpse, and felony theft.
Yeah, the felony theft is from stealing from his employer.
Right. And he was successful in getting his bail reduced to $500,000, which his family was able to post, and he was allowed to live with his mother until his trial began, which was a couple of years.
The murder trial of Michael Blagg actually began in 2004. Now, the families of Michael and Jennifer, who had once been very close to each other, now sat on opposite sides of the courtroom.
Well, yeah, I mean, the families are torn apart, of course.
Absolutely. Now, the prosecution laid out its case and argued that the fatal weekend began with a fight between Jennifer and Mike on Friday, a fight that Jennifer made a note about in one of her religious books. She wrote, "Fought with Mike on Friday." Well, that's pretty obvious.
Well, yeah, and it was dated for the Friday before her death. She actually wrote 11/12/01 in the
Right.
on the side. So to me, that's kind of curious. Why was she documenting that? Did she see possible trouble coming?
I know.
It's strange, because she didn't do a lot of that in her diary or in her books.
No, she didn't. She didn't do that. That's maybe a premonition.
Maybe she felt some kind of need to do that.
So the weekend ended, said District Attorney Frank Daniels, with Jennifer's murder late Monday night. That night, as Jennifer lay in bed, Michael got his gun, he loaded a round into the chamber, and he shot Jennifer in the face. Which he did. He shot her in the eye.
To me, that shows rage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Daniels told the jury that Michael murdered his wife because his addiction to internet porn had destroyed the marriage. He showed the jury the apology email from Michael that said, "I'm sorry if I've given the devil a foothold." They made a big deal out of that, which I don't see. Is that significant, really?
I don't think it's that significant. But anyway, the district attorney insisted that Michael was a murderer.
Absolutely.
That he transported Jennifer's body in the family van after he shot and killed her.
Well, I mean, there was blood in the van.
There was. I mean, there were minute amounts of blood.
Yeah, but several of them.
But several different spots.
And the defense really had difficulty explaining what had happened that night if it hadn't gone the way the prosecutor said. How do you explain the blood in the family van? Well, it's her van, I guess. But how often do you really bleed? Family friends took the stand to praise Michael's marriage and his character in his defense. But the defense really had a difficult time explaining Mike's taped interview, too, where he seemed detached and uncaring. So I don't know if that's fair. And they really used that against him, his behavior during the interview, which is really not necessarily significant.
No, it isn't.
But it seemed to have a real effect on the jury.
Well, again, they want a real upset, frantic husband, and he wasn't acting that way.
But men in particular have been known to be very unemotional or, not showing emotion.
That's us.
Well, it's true. Men are taught as boys not to cry, to be strong. So I don't think it's that unusual, especially a military-type guy.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. But it still all gets back to there's no particular way you're supposed to act.
Right, I agree with that.
However, there was more damage to Michael's case, other than his demeanor. His mother-in-law said on the stand that Michael hurt Jennifer in Corpus Christi, Texas. Jennifer had called home one night and said that Mike had cornered her in the bedroom and was obviously drunk. And Mom, Marilyn, understood that Mike was trying to choke Jennifer.
Now, she'd never mentioned this before.
Not ever.
In what, 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, she said it happened 10 years ago, and it was an incident that had been forgotten until now. But the defense attorney really hammered her, and he basically said, "You're lying."
Yeah, I can almost see that. And not blame her too much, although it's the wrong thing to do, obviously. But
Yeah.
It just seems like maybe she was worried they wouldn't get a conviction, so she said, well, I'm just going to throw in a little extra here to make sure.
It does seem like that.
Could be.
But
Otherwise, why wouldn't she tell the prosecutor? Obviously, she's met with the prosecutor several times over the years.
yeah, I just don't believe that she never thought of that, or it just occurred to her while she was going to testify that day.
Right.
That, oh yeah, I remember this happening.
Not believable, no.
No.
The prosecution also showed the jury the details of the pornography on Mike's computer. So I wonder about that, too. They showed so much that the judge finally said the jury really got the picture, and that's enough. The defense argued that this was a really circumstantial case. I mean, why are you using the internet porn against him? What does that have to do with anything?
Doesn't
Really?
have anything to do
Not
with
really.
it, does it?
Because she never mentioned specifically internet porn in her diary or anything.
No.
So the case...
And she mentioned everything in her diary.
She really seemed to. And also, no murder weapon was ever found. And so what's the motive here? Is there really a motive they came up with?
I guess the closest they could come up with was that she was about to leave him.
Yeah, I don't know.
But still.
I would be more apt to believe that he just went into a rage, because it didn't seem very planned out, that he just got angry. I would see that more than she was going to leave him.
Yeah, that's probably more likely.
Or, I mean, it might be the one and the same. She said, I'm leaving you. She went to bed, and he said, you're not leaving me. I'll show you. Right?
Could be.
I mean, there's really no hard evidence that Jennifer and Mike were in a troubled marriage. So the motive presented by the prosecutor, kind of iffy. And it is a circumstantial case. So I didn't think it was a super strong case. The only thing you're thinking is, well, if he didn't do it, what else happened? Plus the fact that the body was there where it would have been from the dumpster at his work. Now, one question I had that I never was able to get an answer to is, weren't they able to test the dumpster for traces of bodily fluids? Because I wouldn't think it really gets cleaned. Did you think about that?
Yeah, but by the time they got around to thinking about testing it, there's been all sorts of crap run through there.
Yeah, you're right.
I think it'd be a
Been
tough,
months.
tough task.
Probably. It's probably a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it did come to light that Mike had been taking antidepressants, meds for insomnia, and anxiety medications. 6 days before the murders, Zoloft had been added to the mix, which is an antidepressant. Also, in contradiction to what Mike had told police, Jennifer had been on some antidepressants over the years. Jennifer's doctors testified that Jennifer had been prescribed 5 different antidepressants. Now, not at the same time, obviously.
No, but it looks like nothing was helpful, or that there were side effects if she'd been through 5 of them.
Well, I mean, depression is it's so hard to treat. I mean, it really is a experiment in drugs and which ones work and which ones don't. And lots of times it's hard to find anything that does work. Mike's medical records showed that he had been prescribed several powerful drugs. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
At least at the time this occurred, he was on nortriptyline, Xanax, Darvon, and Klonopin for back pain and insomnia. He must have also been on it for stress and anxiety, because none of the Xanax and Klonopin are benzodiazepines that might help with sleep, but they're not prescribed for sleep. They're more for anxiety. And they're the same exact class of drugs, so I'm not sure why both of them were in the mix. Although maybe he was having seizures. I don't know that there's any record of that.
There's no evidence of that,
But
no.
the Klonopin is an anticonvulsant.
Yeah, there's no evidence of that, though.
So, but he was on 2 fairly potent benzodiazepines. The nortriptyline's an antidepressant, an old-timey one, not used much anymore. And there's some side effects with that in terms of heart rhythm disturbances, so it's not used too much anymore. And Darvon is just a pain reliever that doesn't work very well.
So some of these drugs are mind-altering in a way, right?
Well, yes, but not like you're going to fly into rages. They're more sedative type things.
So that might explain why they didn't try and use these drugs to defend him, although if they wanted to do that, he would have had to admit to doing something, so he wasn't going to do that.
And he wasn't doing that.
Right. So the jury deliberated for just over 24 hours before they found Michael Blagg guilty of first-degree murder for Jennifer. There was no trial about Abby because they haven't found her. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Now his conviction was overturned 10 years later in 2014 after Judge David Botker ruled that one of the jurors in the case had committed misconduct. Apparently during jury selection, a woman juror had denied any personal experience with domestic violence, which was a key component of the case against Mike. Long after the trial was over, juror Marilyn Charlesworth admitted to lying on a survey circulated among potential jurors. She admitted at a Grand Junction City Council meeting that she'd been a victim of domestic violence for 10 years.
Well, Marilyn was also accused of concealing her poor vision during the trial, which prevented her from accurately viewing evidence marked as exhibits at trial. She also failed to disclose taking a prescription medication that had the potential to influence her decision. She's being sued by the DA's office for contempt of court. She could face a 6-figure fine for this.
Boy, I guess they take it seriously.
Yeah, but none of these things make me think that he didn't get a fair trial necessarily. Seems like a loophole.
Well, it's gotten him a new trial.
I know, but it doesn't seem like a very strong case for a retrial. But, the whole time he's remained in jail without bond waiting for this new trial. His attorneys were successful in getting the new trial moved from Grand Junction, and they fended off an attempt by the prosecution to introduce evidence that was never used in the first trial that suggested he made a previous attempt to kill Jennifer and Abby by causing a gas leak. So that's interesting.
Well, that's new.
Yeah.
Now, there hasn't been a trial date set just yet.
Not that I could find. The last thing I could find on this was, I think, August 2017, and there was no trial date yet.
So his siblings, John Blagg and Claire Peterson, are seeking more information about an alternate suspect, and his attorneys are expected to present new evidence at trial pointing to another suspect. This person is known only as Mr. B. He's a Canadian sex offender, and according to the defense attorneys, is the person responsible for the murder of Jennifer.
Okay, but the sex offender, why would he take 2 bodies away?
Well, we're still stuck with that one, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, that's the real curious thing.
Yeah, you're trying to conceal the crime. So a sex offender isn't going to do that.
Well, if you're not related to Jennifer and Abby, why would you want to have their bodies with you? Unless you were going to take one of them to molest or something, I could see that a sex offender might take one of them. But you're not going to take a mother and daughter.
I wouldn't think.
And then, I mean, the other big thing is, how did Jennifer's body end up where it did? I mean, that squarely points at Mike.
Yeah, I think the evidence is pretty definite that where the body was found was where the contents of the dumpster from Mike's workplace had been dumped on that particular day.
That's the most damning thing, I guess, right?
Yes.
According to the document filed by the attorney, 27 out of 33 filings in the case made since last December have been entered under seal, meaning that the people who aren't parties in these proceedings can't see them. So several documents that were filed were placed under protected status by the court staff, so that makes it difficult to get a lot of information on this case. Now, the Blagg siblings have been waiting for 16 years to find out who committed these brutal crimes, according to their attorney. They have a strong interest in learning about the alternate suspect that has finally come to light. So that's their whole defense, is they found this alternate suspect. This filing also noted that the siblings really believe strongly in Mike's innocence, which we knew that.
Now, though Abby's presumed dead, and that she was most likely murdered by Michael, her father, her body has never been found. So Michael Blagg has therefore never faced any charges in connection with Abby's disappearance and or death.
Yeah, which is kind of surprising to me. I mean, I think they almost could prove it without a body.
It sounds like. I mean, he's been found guilty of his wife's murder.
Right, and the daughter went missing the same day.
Yeah.
Mostly at the urging of Mike's family, Abby has been updated on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's website, though, also on the Charlie Project, although she is presumed dead. If Abby were alive today, she'd be 22 years old. It's a little bit reassuring to Jennifer's family that Jennifer was probably asleep and didn't know that her husband was killing her, and they really hope that Abby didn't know it was her own dad who took her life. Prosecutors believe that Mike strangled Abby, but of course we don't know how Abby died, if she died. So it just really turns out to be a really sad case, a tragic, pointless death for two innocent people, which,
very, very depressing.
It is really sad. Well, before we get to feedback, I have a little bit of TCB housekeeping to take care of. Oh, and before we read the feedback, also, Dick is going to announce our t-shirt design winners.
We've got winners.
Yay.
And we said plural.
Yes.
Not just winner. So we have two winners, one for the front of the shirt and one for the back. We didn't plan it this way, but it just worked out that way.
Part of that might have been the difficulty making a decision, but I think it turned out really good, because we're going to have a really cute shirt out of this.
I think it's a good-looking design. So the front of the shirt, we've chosen a design by Jason Office from Ottawa, Canada. And the back, we have a design by Katushka Rakovic. I hope I pronounced that correctly, from Atlanta, Georgia.
Congratulations, Jason and Katushka.
Way to go. Excellent. We had a ton of entries. It was a very difficult decision.
We really did. I mean, many of you put out a lot of effort and submitted excellent designs, and I wish I could have chosen everybody.
So each of you will receive a check of $250 from Tie Grabber Podcasts.
Well, each of the two winners, not each listener.
Oh, I should have said that. Let's make it less ambiguous.
Yeah.
And each winner will receive one of the T-shirts that they helped design.
That's right, and then we're going to make up a bunch and bring them to CrimeCon to sell.
Well, we don't know that we're allowed to sell things.
I think we are. We just have to make an arrangement.
Okay.
We'll work that out.
All right.
If not, we'll give some away.
Anyway, thank you to everyone who entered. There's clearly a lot of effort involved. We appreciate it.
Yeah, and I've saved a lot of the designs. If we ever have something else we need a design for, I'll be in contact with people who've made them to see if we can use them, because there were definitely some great designs that just weren't right for the t-shirt, but were great designs for other things. Some great stuff. And here is where I add a little plug for our members-only podcast episodes. These episodes are exclusively for Team Tie Grabber members who can listen to them on our website or on most podcast apps. We release a members-only episode at least once a month. We recently released an episode on the Craigslist killer Philip Markoff. This month we're covering the heartbreaking and mysterious case of wanted fugitive Robert Fisher. Robert Fisher's wife and children were found murdered when the family home was engulfed in flames one night. He was gone, and he is still on the run. There was actual video footage of Robert Fisher taking money from an ATM. People who knew the family didn't see this coming at all. This is really an unbelievable story that makes me think about how well we actually know the people that we see in our lives every day. Insight from those who knew Robert Fisher and his family I just found absolutely fascinating.
You can join Team Tie Grabber for either $3 or $5 a month on our website, tiegrabber.com. Members will receive TCB gifts and our undying admiration.
Absolutely.
So if you're interested, sign up at tiegrabber.com or support us on Patreon and hear the premium episodes there as a patron. You can also support us by making a purchase through the Shop the Brewery page on our website, or giving us a positive review on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcasts.
As most of you probably know, CrimeCon is coming up May 4th through 6th in Nashville, Tennessee. We're going to have a table on Podcast Row for the first time, so I'm super excited. A little bit nervous, too, but it should be a lot of fun meeting listeners and other podcasters. Plus, that cute actor who plays the young Joe Kenda will be there. And I'm still hoping that Joe himself will make an appearance, because we really like him. He'd be fun to meet. He'd be a fun guy to take out for a beer, wouldn't he?
He seems like.
And of course, I'm hoping that Keith Morrison will be there. I've written some fangirl letters to Keith asking him to come, but I still haven't heard. Hopefully I haven't scared him off. If it's workable for you, we definitely want to see you at CrimeCon. Dick is researching Nashville breweries and watering holes that we're hoping to have some real true crime brewery meetups to drink some beers with our listeners. If you use our promo code TC Brewery at checkout, you'll get 10% off of your admission. So that should help out a little bit. In the meantime, please write in and share your ideas and opinions with us for feedback on a future episode. You can also share your opinions and experiences on our True Crime Brewery fan discussions page on Facebook. We have some amazing listeners there who have great stuff to share. And one more note about signing up for TieGrabber. When you join, it isn't always instantaneous. To avoid robot members, with some email servers I end up needing to check a member before the system can send you your email with your login information. So usually the membership goes through right away, but it could take an hour or two. Another thing some listeners have contacted me about is they can't find their email. And sometimes the confirmation email is in your junk folder. So if you don't see an email right away, it's definitely worth checking your junk email folder. And I thank you so much for your patience in that. We have a large quantity of feedback today, really good stuff, and I think we should get to it.
Let's do it. I think you're up first.
Okay, let's see what I've got here. Okay, I have a case suggestion from Lindsay M., and it is about David Agan, who killed Christine Agan. Lindsay says, one of the most interesting cases I've heard of. Of course, I don't know the details. That's where you come in. But what I know is that this man cornered his wife at a local medical facility and stabbed her to death with a screwdriver to prevent her from testifying against him for having incestual sex. He was convicted of rape, incest, and murder. So that sounds like a hell of a suggestion, doesn't it?
Sounds like an easy case to do.
Yeah, so I just did some very basic preliminary investigation on this one. David Agan Jr., he logged onto Facebook and wrote a post to his estranged wife, the woman he described as his dearest love, wife, and mentor, and he said, "Believe me when I say I'm utterly in love with you." This was to Christine Agan, 37, of Kinderhook, the mother of 4 of his 5 children, including 8-year-old triplets and a 14-year-old. "I would not deliberately offend you," he said, "upset you, or do anything that might even cause you stress." But Agan, 42, was charged with repeatedly stabbing his wife at Valeti Medical Arts Facility. The killing followed what police said were earlier instances of domestic violence. An order of protection barred him from seeing his children, but not her. So this was very devastating in the community. He was charged with second-degree murder, which could mean 25 years to life. Christine was stabbed at 2 p.m., and she was announced dead just moments later. State police said he left the scene, spurring a manhunt that ended when he was found later in the afternoon. His face was bruised. He resisted arrest. He was taken to Albany Medical Center Hospital after police feared he had possibly ingested unknown prescription drugs before he was pulled over in his car. So David Agan's posts focused on his estrangement from his wife and children, and later to rage over his wife receiving $29,000 in what he described as a temporary custody arrangement. Agan wrote, "I have lost my boys and wife and just about all of the materialistic things I owned. I don't know how to move forward, but I'm not going to quit trying. Some way, somehow, I will fix this cursed life of mine." And I guess he didn't do that. He made it worse.
Doesn't sound like he fixed it, does it?
No. So shortly before the murder, he said, "No words can explain how I currently feel, but the simplest way to try is to say I'm deeply hurt for what I am going through. I have been stripped of my wife, my children, and thus my bonds of trust and happiness. I feel alone, wanted only when it benefits others. But screw what I want or need. But hey, it's Thanksgiving. People have better things to do than worry about me." So he sounds like an asshole, doesn't he? Very poor me, poor me.
Sounds like a nut.
Yeah. Well, and a real jerk, too. So yeah, we'll look into that. Interesting. I don't know if it'll be enough for a whole podcast, but one of these days I'd like to do a podcast with a series of little blurbs on strange murders.
Well, sure.
That'd be cool.
It's always a possibility.
Okay, so what have you got there?
I also have an episode suggestion from Kay, who says, "I think you may find the horrorcore murders of Farmville, Virginia interesting. In short, an online teen love affair went wrong, with the teenage boy bludgeoning the girlfriend, her friend, the mother of the child, and then the father after he stopped by the house. Then he apparently remained in the house for several days after the crime wearing the same clothes. And he had still convinced small-town police force who stopped by for a wellness check that the group was at the movies. So the crime occurred in a small-town neighborhood next to a popular open field. So many were around the house outside during the days the bodies were inside decomposing. They call this the Farmville murders. It's the quadruple slaying of Mark Niederbrock, Deborah Kelly, that's the father and mother, Emma Niederbrock, the daughter, and Emma's friend Melanie Wells.
How old were Emma and her friend?
Emma was 16, her friend was 18.
And the murderer was how old?
The murderer was 20.
Oh. You know what? I think I saw this on an episode of Web of Lies.
Did you?
An abbreviated version, of course. But yeah. This was a disturbed young man who met her online.
Yeah, he was an aspiring rapper.
Okay.
And they describe him on Wikipedia as a troubled, aspiring rapper. He and his girlfriend and the friend of the girlfriend and her parents had attended a horrorcore concert the week before. So enlighten me, what's a horrorcore concert?
Oh, I think it's like that, what do they call that kind of hard rock? There's a name for it, which I can't think of. It's like slasher stuff.
All right.
You know, they purposely try and look like murderers, and there's like fake blood, and...
He used as his murder weapon a ball-peen hammer and a wood-splitting maul.
Holy shit.
So this was pretty personal stuff.
Well, wouldn't you have to have some time to set that up?
Well, apparently he murdered the mother, her daughter, and the daughter's friend. The father was out of the house. He returned home and then was subsequently murdered also. So Dad came at the wrong place at the wrong time. Sounds interesting. I think we should look into that.
What was the motive? Did they tell him to go away or something?
She was going to break up with him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think I do remember an episode of that on Web of Lies. One of my top 10 investigation discovery shows. I don't think they've had any new ones of that lately, but that would be a good thing to podcast about. So I have a comment from Lynette on our last episode we did, Unfortunate Sons, on the Raffe family killings and the convictions of Sebastian Burns and Atif Raffe.
Yeah, I was amazed that people took us to task.
Holy shit.
I think the prevailing opinion is that the two of them were guilty, which we didn't support.
No, I was surprised at how many people wrote in saying they thought they were guilty. I mean, there were a few people on our side, but I'd say 80% were saying how wrong we were.
Yeah, I was amazed.
Yeah. Well, because you were totally that they're innocent.
I was.
Yeah.
Well, not anymore.
You're not? Did they change your mind?
No, they didn't change my mind, but there was a lot of backlash on that opinion.
There was, I know. But I think that's another case where people didn't like their attitudes or the way they came across. Which, you know,
particularly Burns. Sebastian, he was perceived as an arrogant prick.
He was, yeah. Well, Lynette says that she's a longtime listener and fan. She says, I travel extensively for work in rural New South Wales, Australia, and you two are the best traveling companions. So that's pretty cool.
That's nice to hear.
It's just amazing to think of someone in Australia listening to us. Isn't that neat?
I know.
Makes you want to travel there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to do that. So she says, your latest episode, Unfortunate Sons, was of particular interest to me because of the Mr. Big method used in obtaining confessions by the police. This was the exact method the police used here in Australia to extract a confession and conviction from the killer, but more importantly, where he had buried the body. And the case she's referring to is 13-year-old Daniel Morecombe, who was abducted on the 7th of December 2003 on the Sunshine Coast here in Australia. This is a pretty famous case. I've heard of it before. So she goes on to say, Daniel's parents launched a high-profile campaign to find Daniel's body and the killer. The case remained unsolved for 8 years. In August 2011, Brett Peter Cohen was charged with Daniel's murder, and on the 13th of March 2014 he was convicted of murder. As I mentioned, the method used in obtaining his conviction was the Mr. Big method pioneered in Canada. After the conviction, there was a lot of debate in the media on the merits of this method, as it can be construed to be entrapment, as you mentioned as well in your podcast. If you're interested in doing Daniel's case as an episode, there's a lot of information regarding this case. This method was used to great effect in putting a very dangerous and evil man away in prison. And she tells us to enjoy our break and to keep up the good work. So thanks, Lynette.
Yeah, it sounds interesting.
It does.
We should look into that.
It's a pretty famous case, but I think it might be worth looking into, especially if we can talk about the Mr. Big technique some more, because I found that really fascinating.
I would love the opportunity to go more into that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have some more recent feedback that we probably won't get to until next week about the Mr. Big, so.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
So I have a comment from Vicky, another Australian lady.
We have some nice Aussies that write in.
Hi there. I listened to your episode on William Tyrrell. Tyrrell. I wanted to contact to say well done. You pronounced the town names pretty good. I myself live in Watchapee. Is that how we pronounced it?
I have no idea.
I can't remember. Anyway, Vicky says she was surprised we said it right, because most people don't, and I probably just butchered it. She says, I learned more from your podcast than I knew from actually living right near where it happened. Then she goes on to say, as for the beer review, that cracked me up. Ha ha ha. Foster's is not the Aussie beer you want to review. Us Aussies won't even drink Foster's. Yuck.
But it's Australian for beer. That's a lie.
Try VB Victorian Bitter. If a beer had to represent, it should be that, more so than Foster's. Again, well done, guys. I really enjoy your podcasts. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't pick Foster's as a great beer. But here in the States, we think of Foster's as Australian beer.
It's like it's the most famous Australian beer over here, at least.
You might, in Australia, think of Budweiser as America's beer.
Well, it's probably a similar situation, right? Yeah.
Crappy beers that are just associated with a region.
Right. Well, I mean, they might be good for what they are, right?
Right.
They're not sipping beers that you're going to enjoy, but they might be worth slugging back on a hot day.
Yeah. And you get that cool big can of Foster's.
That's true. That's always a good thing.
But I know we're going to be doing another Australian case fairly soon. So, Vicky, you can be assured that we will review VB Victorian Bitter for the beer review in that case.
All right. If you can get it. It might be hard to find.
We have ways.
So I have some case suggestions from Alexa B. And the first one is Jamie Bulger. This was and is a pretty harrowing case, mostly because the perpetrators were age 10 at the time. Jamie, age 2, was lured from a shopping center in Liverpool, whilst his mother was temporarily distracted.
Oh, that's a famous case.
Yes. I think I have a book on that, actually, that I've been meaning to read. But it's so heartbreaking. It's tough. It's a tough subject.
Yeah.
I mean, not only because of such a young victim, a baby, really, but then
the young age of the perpetrators.
Yeah, it's so disturbing. So she says that both boys are adults now and have been given new identities. She'd be interested to hear your opinion about nature versus nurture, as both boys came from dysfunctional homes and had a pretty horrible upbringing. Not that that excuses their actions. One of the boys, now an adult, has been in trouble since being released and charged with child pornography. So was this evil something innate or a result of his terrible childhood? Well, I think Alexa knows us because we love the nature versus nurture debate.
We do.
It's so fascinating.
There's one to look into.
Yeah, we will be doing that one eventually, I believe. Another one she recommends is Colin Howell and Hazel Buchanan. This is one of those truth is stranger than fiction cases. Colin and Hazel were engaged in an extramarital affair in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Affairs are controversial at any time, but this affair was carried out by two prominent members of a Baptist church in Portadown, Northern Ireland. Have we done Irish cases? I know we did a Scottish case.
Yeah, no, we've done an Irish case. The husband who killed his wife.
Oh, that's right.
She was an athlete.
Joe. His name was Joe.
Yeah, Joe something.
Yeah, that was a good one. Both of their spouses found out about the affair, and then Colin and Hazel devised a plan where they would stage a double murder as a suicide due to the fact both partners were devastated by the revelations. The police believed the suicide setup. Colin and Hazel only stayed together for about 5 years after the murder. They both married other people, and everything carried on as normal for them for the next 20 years. But then Colin had his faith brought into question and ended up confessing everything to the elders of his church, and was subsequently imprisoned. Of course, then, Hazel was implicated, and she too went to prison. It's a very interesting case, the psychology of Colin with strong religious beliefs in particular. I like the sounds of that one.
I do too. I'm kind of mystified why it took him so long. If his faith was that strong that he felt the need to confess, how come it occurred 20-some years after the fact?
Well, I think there was an internal battle.
Of 20 plus
20
years?
years of an internal battle.
Boy, that must have been tough.
Well, I'm sure. But it's like they got away with almost the perfect murder there.
They did get away
or
with
double
it.
murder.
Yeah.
So I think that's super interesting.
The other interesting thing is these guys who have the affair were together for just a few years afterwards, and then they went their separate ways.
Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting to me, too.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot like, what's their names in I Shall Not Kill that we did like a month ago? The preacher and the woman. They didn't stay together.
No, they didn't.
Of course, they went to prison, but they bailed on each other quickly. She got married while he was in prison.
Yeah.
Okay. And then another one, Alexa's full of great ideas.
She's got 3 ideas?
4.
4.
Here's the third one. Meredith Kircher. I'm sure you've heard of this case since one of the people accused of murdering her was an American. I've read a lot about it and would be interested in your opinions on the police and forensic team and the investigation who you think killed Meredith. So this is Amanda Knox, right?
Is that what they're talking about?
I think so. Isn't it Meredith Kircher who was killed by Amanda Knox?
I believe.
Look it up while I'm reading. I'll read the next one while you check that, but I'm pretty sure. So the fourth one is Dusty Turner and Billy Joe Brown. And she says, I only heard of this case when I saw a documentary about 2 of them on Amazon Prime. It's got to be one of the worst miscarriages of justice I've ever heard. Basically, Billy Joe Brown killed a girl called Jennifer Evans, and out of spite towards Dusty Turner, who had confessed his role in the murder to the police and in Billy Joe's mind betrayed him, accused him of killing her. About 8 years later, Billy Joe confessed to the fact he lied about Dusty's involvement, and Dusty was all set to come home, but several ridiculous laws and law personnel became involved later. He is still in there. The poor guy has spent more than half his life behind bars for something he didn't do. Any involvement he did have in Jennifer's death, he is paid for, in my opinion. This is another case I'd love to get your input on. Try and check out the documentary if you can get it over there. It's called Navy SEAL, Murderer Framed Target of Opportunity. So we'll have to check Amazon Prime and see if we have it.
Let's look it up.
And she says, thank you. Alexa Bryce. She's from Kelso, Scotland.
Ah.
Alexa B.
So we're pretty cool. We're getting all the international listeners today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and yes, that is Amanda Knox's story. She was accused of killing Kircher.
Yes. Everybody knows Amanda Knox.
Everybody knows.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have another suggestion for a case from Tawny J, which is about a Facebook selfie belt murder. I don't know about doing a whole episode, but this is just an interesting story. My husband, who's not a true crime fan, told me this crazy story of a woman who was found strangled with a belt. This turned out to be the same belt that had been worn by her friend when they took a selfie that night that she was murdered. So she Googled it. It looks like there isn't a lot of info on it. The names of the people are Cheyenne Antoine and Brittany Gargol. Love your podcast. It's my first podcast I ever listened to.
Cool.
So this is a Canadian woman who murdered her best friend in March 2015. And she ended up giving prosecutors all the proof they needed when she posed a selfie with the victim in which she wore the same belt that was found near the dead woman's body.
Oh, gee.
Duh.
Wow.
So Cheyenne Rose Antoine pleaded guilty to killing her best friend, Brittany Gargol, after getting into a heated argument following a night of drinking, and she was sentenced to 7 years in prison.
Kind of unusual. Women don't kill each other that often.
No. So police reported a photo of Gargol and Antoine together that appeared on Facebook hours after the woman was discovered dead on the side of a road in Saskatoon.
So this person actually posted it after she did the murder?
Yeah.
Wow. Was she just wanting to get caught or an idiot?
I don't know. It says after a night of heavy drinking, so maybe she was a little indisposed.
Yeah, I guess so. Wow.
Or just plain stupid.
I think that's where I'm leaning. So Roseanne told us about a case, and this case was about a man in Texas who was going to be executed for killing his 2 daughters. So this man who killed his 2 daughters at his Dallas apartment in 2001, while the girls' mothers listened on the phone and heard the gunshots and her children's screams. John Battaglia, 62, a former accountant, He'd been divorced from his wife, Mary, for about a year when he fatally shot their daughters, who were only 9 and 6. At the time of the shooting, his wife was seeking to have him arrested for violating a protective order by threatening her. According to court documents, shortly before he was scheduled to host his daughters for a regular dinner, a police officer told him by phone that he needed to surrender for violating his probation. The officer asked him to turn himself in so that police would not have to take him into custody while he was with his daughters. After the girls arrived at his apartment, he left a message on his wife's phone. When she called back, he put the phone on speaker and demanded that his wife speak with one of the daughters. The daughter then asked, "Mommy, why do you want Daddy to go to jail?" and could be heard a few seconds later saying, "No, Daddy, please don't do it." Then the mother heard gunshots and screams. Battaglia shouted an obscenity at her on the phone. She called 911 and police found both of her daughters dead in his apartment. They'd both been shot multiple times. After the shooting, he went to a bar with his girlfriend and was arrested shortly afterward at a tattoo parlor where he was getting rose tattoos to remember his daughters by. It only took a jury 20 minutes to convict him.
Sounded like an easy one.
But this is a scary thing when you're dealing with domestic violence, because it's so hard to say what's going on, and then they give him the chance to surrender himself, and look what he does.
Yeah.
And how do you know? I mean, they probably should have just gone ahead and arrested him in hindsight.
Well, it's like the one we did in North Carolina, Fritz, the fake doctor.
Yeah, I thought they waited way too long on that one. So that's just really sad. Really, really sad one.
Okay, I got another one. This is from Ann W. So this is a very long letter that I'm just going to paraphrase it in parts. She's writing about junk science versus science. And her point is that national studies have concluded that several forensic sciences, such as those focused on blood spatter, bite marks, handwriting, tire tread and footprint impressions, ballistics, and arson, are unreliable because they are not grounded in scientific research. So her point is that experts testifying might not have correct information.
Well, I think that's valid because when you're watching a trial, you have experts on each side giving the opposite opinion.
Right.
So it doesn't seem like there's a concrete.
There isn't.
Okay.
Now, I mean, the first response I'd have is that I don't think this is junk science. I mean, to me, junk science is that bullshit about cold fusion years ago.
Or that vaccines cause autism.
Right.
Right.
Good point. But these sciences that are mentioned above are not unreliable. They're grounded in scientific research, but the research might be contradictory, unclear. It might be difficult to find out exactly what it is going on. And as you said, we can have widely divergent expert opinions.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all about the interpretation of it, right?
Right. So that's the point, and particularly like with blood spatter.
Yeah.
We had that with one of our real early cases, the staircase.
Michael Peterson,
that we had experts arguing the opposite of each other.
Yep.
So it's clear that there's a lot more research that needs to be done.
Well, haven't they recently decided that bite marks, did you mention bite marks?
I mentioned them as being unreliable, but yeah. In fact, the leading expert on bite mark analysis has taken the opinion now that all his stuff is untrue.
Wow.
So you cannot look at a bite mark on a extremity or something and match it precisely with a mouth.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could see that. Well, there was a great segment on this on the John Oliver Show, which is on HBO, but you can also see the segment on YouTube for free.
And John Oliver, who is a fantastic comedian, presents really thoughtful episodes on things, and he went over this. And the blood spatter, the bite marks, he even talked about fingerprints, which you would think of as being, what word am I looking for?
Concrete?
Concrete, thank you. So when there was a bombing in Europe, they found fingerprints that matched a guy in Oregon who wasn't even in Europe, couldn't have done it. And then they found out that the fingerprint matched up with someone in Europe. So these two people have nearly identical fingerprints, with the idea being that no two people have the same fingerprint, but you can have enough similarity that for all intents and purposes they're the same fingerprint.
Well, yeah, and also I think that there's always room for error.
Sure. And even DNA testing, which is supposed to be the gold standard. But
right. What can go wrong with that?
Well, the things that can go wrong with that is that it's fragile, so you might not get real good results from it. The other thing is that if there's mixtures of DNA, it can be difficult to parse out whose DNA is whose.
Well, I guess I don't know enough about the specifics, but I certainly thought that was the golden standard.
Well, it is.
It is, right?
With certain provisions. So I think Ann W. wrote a very thoughtful letter, and we would agree with her, just not calling it junk science.
You don't like the term junk science?
Not in this regard.
Right.
But we certainly, or I would, I guess you would too, would agree that there's still a lot to be learned.
Oh, sure.
So thank you, Ann.
Yeah, that was a great letter. I mean, she obviously put some time into that. And it's something to consider, which I don't think we've considered in many of our cases.
You're right.
It's not something that we've really brought up, but it is something worth thinking about in most cases.
Well, I mean, we did bring it up in the Michael Peterson case.
Yeah, because the blood spatter, that really isn't, I mean, that is definitely up for interpretation. Okay.
Well, and even the most recent one we did, the Rafe case, where they were supposedly able to determine that there were 3 people present based on blood spatter. So I'm not sure about that.
I'm not either, and I don't know enough to judge it, but I could see where that could be something you would interpret.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, plus saying that Sebastian's hairs in the tub meant that he was the murderer. I mean, those hairs could have been there for a while, I would imagine.
They could have been, yep.
Speaking of that, I just have a quick other comment on Unfortunate Sons. And this is a guy who agreed with you, so I wanted to just read that one. And this is David from Augusta, Georgia. He says, cases like this send chills up my spine. The cops always look at the most immediate next of kin in a crime of violence. But shouldn't they look beyond those people when the facts point that way? Of course they should. Why don't they? Hubris, laziness, a conservative mindset rooted in cultural ignorance. This is the Chief Clancy Wiggums of The Simpsons approach to justice.
Good comment.
What kind of justice system is it when good guys are as bad at their jobs as this? Everyone who lives in that jurisdiction ought to be very, very worried. And I think David makes a good point. You can say, oh, these guys seem like they did it, look how they're acting, but put yourself in their shoes. You know, are you a likable person that everyone's going to be on their side? Is your behavior going to be judged the right way? It is kind of scary.
It certainly is.
Whether they're guilty or not. All right, I have one last letter, and this is from April S. So April says that she's hooked on the podcast, and she says, unfortunately, true crime was introduced to her at just 10 years old. She would have been present at the time of murders had her room been cleaned. Since it was not, her mom decided that she could not stay the night at her cousin's after all. Probably the only time a messy room saved my life. We spent a lot of time on almost a daily basis with these ladies. My mom and her took turns helping one another clean house. This happened on January 27, 1992, in a small town of Atlanta, Texas. So a journalist in the area covered the case from the very beginning, and there's a book about it titled Among Murders and Madness by Sunny Long.
The idea is that if she had ended up staying there, she would have been one of the victims?
Right.
Wow.
When she was 10, yeah. She gave me a link to this article. Guilty plea in East Texas triple murder case. Michael Kevin Haley, the man accused of killing his ex-girlfriend and her 2 daughters in Cass County, Texas, 17 years ago, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison in a plea agreement with prosecutors. So he admitted killing Jerry Butts at her Atlanta, Texas home in 1992. He's also suspected of murdering Butts' 2 daughters, 11-year-old Jessica and 3-year-old Mackenzie, though he was not required to admit to those slayings as part of the plea. Jerry and Jessica were strangled, and Mackenzie was drowned in the bathtub. The case had gone unsolved for 15 years when Cass District Attorney Clint Allen reactivated it shortly after he took office. Using forensic technology not available at the time of the murders, he got indictments. So Hallie is currently serving an 87-year prison sentence for attempted murder for stabbing a man at a North Caddo Parish bar in 2004. So obviously not a good person. So there's this book, Among Murders and Madness, and there's a little picture of the mom and her 2 daughters. It's really sad. She also brought up that she wanted to know if we have an age difference, because she and her husband have 17 years. So we do. We have 19 years between us. Of course, Dick's the older one. Everyone knows that.
Well, that's obvious for anyone that sees us.
I hope so, just because I don't want to look 19 years older. But you look great. Also, April asked if I would give a shout out to her and her co-worker Kelly. So thanks, April, and hi, April and Kelly. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm definitely going to get the book and read it, because that's like a close call. I think that would give you something to think about.
That sure is a close call.
Holy shit,
I think that'd be fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, anything where someone is a near miss, it always makes my blood kind of run cold, gives me a chill.
You bet.
So was that our final?
I'm done.
All right. A lot of feedback, and I still have more left over. So I think because we didn't have an episode, people took more time to write.
Okay.
Makes me think
either
maybe
that or
we
we're
should...
going to have a special feedback episode.
No, we can
Okay.
fit it in. I think we got through a lot today.
I think we did 9 or 10.
Such good stuff, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have some smart people listening. I love it. So let's wrap it up, and let's tell people that we'll see them next week
We will see you next week.
at the Quiet Ed.
No week off.
Nope.
Now we're going to have to do something in early March because you're taking off for a few days.
Oh, that's okay. I'll get it done in advance.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.